that stigma has now transitioned over to electric vehicles. And they're, it's not going to work. But that's where my standpoint was, whereas, okay, for fleets and small businesses and things like that, it's like, well, how are we going to navigate that? Because I'm not opposed to the electric vehicles at all.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Make Trades Great Again podcast. Eric, Andy, and special guest, Denver Baker. Denver, you've been on the show a few times. Thanks for joining us, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Andy, you and I talk about this a lot, and then Denver, you brought it up on Instagram a couple weeks ago, and it got us all thinking, and our heads are turning and churning, and we're Googling, and Andy's got AI sick him on the case here. We're going to get right into it today. I'm excited about this topic. So EV vehicles as it's related to the trade. So Denver, can you just tell us kind of how you thought about this topic?
Yeah.
I mean, you weren't thinking, we're going to talk about it on the podcast, but that's where we're at today. So how did you kind of get on this train of thought?
So I was driving around one day and I was going between jobs, and I started thinking to myself, it was actually because another EV had passed me, coming the opposite direction. And I started thinking about, okay, I'm going to a service call, then I got to go to another service call and another one. And then I started thinking, okay, what about the service technician? I'm obviously the owner of my company. What about my technicians who work for me that take vans home? Because, all the technicians that work for me, they take their vans home every night. And so I'm thinking, okay, if I have to, with all the new mandates that are coming down the line, potentially, if I have to switch over to electric vehicles, then now who and how are we going to be responsible for putting in charging stations for our technicians? And the bigger thing is, putting in a charging station, most of us trades guys can do it. It's really easy. It's not that bad. You tie it into your panel and whatnot. But the thing I started thinking of was the people that don't own their own home, if they rent, or if they have an apartment complex, or they live in an apartment complex. Sorry. So that's where it really sparked a thought in my head. And that's where I put that video out on Instagram. And then obviously everyone just kind of the same thing. It seemed like everyone was like, I never thought about that. Like, well, what are we going to do? And blah, 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 and so it kind of just has snowballed and gone from there.
Yeah. I think the real basics is kind of where I was at when you posted that and I commented. Like, I knew the basics of, like, look, if you're going to expand your fleet into EV vehicles, it seems to me like the very first thing you do is consider instead of having them drive the vehicle and park it at home,
right?
Like you could probably consider switching over, having them park at the shop. I mean, that might actually be a lot easier, right? But then you get into things like, do you own your property? Are you
And that's like with me. I don't know. I don't even own my building. Yeah, it's I lease it. So yeah,
all stuff that isn't new at all in this industry, even when it comes to just tenant improvements and, warehousing and I know a buddy of mine, he's a carpenter. They own a remodeling business and they added a loading dock to the building that they lease. Right. I mean, not a small not a small improvement, that they absolutely needed this on their property. And so like the cost burdens on them. Right. So different, lease agreements change, all that kind of stuff. Andy, you were thinking about this too, and you were looking into like the logistics of all the vehicles and stuff. But what are your thoughts when it came to, you've got 3 guys out in the field right now. You're probably going to expand as you have each year in the last handful of years. What do you think about when it comes to this kind of your guys are driving the vehicles home, right?
Right. Rob lives in a condo complex, right? Mm-hmm. He owns his condo.
Right.
There's no EV provision there.
Right.
At the
He's
condo
parking
association.
in a parking lot, right?
He's parking in a parking stall and there's not power outside.
Right.
And it may not be in front of his unit. Right. So, you start looking at that and go, well, okay, let's take a condo complex. Let's say there's 70 condos in there. Do you put an EV charger on every one? How big is the power service to that building now that you got 70 rapid chargers? It's massive.
Yeah.
It'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars of improvement and infrastructure change just for a single property alone, I would imagine.
Right. And that's one vehicle per household now can charge.
Right.
Right.
So if you have if you've got, hey, whatever, husband and wife or whatever, two people per unit type thing that are both driving EVs. Well, who charges? Who doesn't?
Right.
Do you go out and swap them at midnight?
Swap them at midnight. Yeah, exactly.
You know, and hope that everything's good. But, you know, so I kind of thought about that kind of stuff. And then I went, well, okay, that's on, you know, the condo side of it. Tristan, lives in an apartment complex. He's not even allowed to park a commercial vehicle on the property.
Oh,
which
right?
is a little,
because they're like
little different than normal. I mean, you see a lot of parking lots at apartments that do have the cargo vans in them, but I could see that. I could definitely see that. Yeah.
And there's a street
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So, I mean, there's some interesting concepts of that. And at that point it's like, well, I mean, that's just the way it is then, you know. I mean, if you can't park a vehicle near a charger, then it's got to go to the shop.
Right.
Yeah. The first,
that's a downturn, but, yeah,
I'd say the closer you get to the city centers, right, the higher the likelihood that your employees are going to live in multifamily housing. It's just the way it is, right? So,
that's absolutely.
And so where I'm at, I'm on the edge of rural and city, right? And so 20 minutes one way, 25, 30 minutes, you're in downtown Minneapolis. And so you can imagine the Twin Cities metro area is quite big.
Yep.
You drive out to my house, you start seeing farm fields, but I'm only 5 minutes away from an actual, city center suburb. Even in those suburbs, you've got increasing amount of multifamily and cost. I mean, we don't have to get into it, but like, just consider simple things. Like if you're going to hire someone, it's likely that they're not even going to have a house because they can't afford one.
Right. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
housing prices now, they're crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you start looking at like the vehicles themselves, right? So you buy an EV and almost every one of the EVs comes with what's called a level 1 charger. So it's a 110 outlet, plug it in. It ain't going to charge that battery from 0 to, 80% in less than 12 to 15 hours. Like it's going to take an overnight charge. It's not going to be super economical. But that's what's going to come probably in the, sitting on the passenger seat when you drive it off the lot, right?
Yeah.
So that's so you can get charging right away. But then you got to consider, like, we're not talking about, most likely not talking about, fleets arriving at HVAC and plumbing and service companies that are going to be running on level 1 chargers, because it just doesn't seem like it would make a whole lot of sense. It's probably going to be in play. You're probably going to have to carry that charger around and plug it in here and there as an emergency thing. But, then you go to the level 2, and that's your 240, 220, 240 volt though.
Yep.
Single phase, obviously you're wiring in those chargers. Like you brought up Denver. So I started talking to an electrician buddy of mine here in the cities.
Yep.
And he's putting in chargers, not all the time, but he's like, probably 15 to 20 in a year last year. Right. He said the year before, right. But he said the year before that, 5, so it's like it's picking up and it's good business. He's working residential almost exclusively when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how many, what kind of chargers are you putting in? Like, what are the vehicles? He's like, overwhelmingly they're Teslas in our area. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
He's like, I've done some, Leafs and other, like I did a Jeep the other day, he said, and he's like, and I said, well, are they all the same kind of charger? He's like, well, for the most part, they're the same. It's like putting a welder in your shop. It's really not that different. It's most likely going to be a 50 or 60 amp circuit, with the disconnect. And then you wire in the factory supplied, or what they usually are buying these level 2 chargers from the dealer when they're buying the vehicle kind of deal is what I'm told.
Right.
I don't have any experience and I've been trying to figure that kind of stuff out, but
yeah,
you start looking into that and like, you got to get Google results that people are talking about. Otherwise you're going straight to the dealer and then they're emailing you, hey, you want to buy an EV? And I don't want that.
Exactly. Yeah, no. I'm just looking for info.
Right. But
we saw that you thought about it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that means you're interested now. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to talk about AI. That's what AI is going to do for these corporations.
Oh, yeah.
Market to you. Yeah. Do not, you thought Google was bad enough or
Facebook.
Facebook.
Yeah. I found, one of the things that I thought was fairly interesting because I hadn't actually read up on it, to understand it. And one of them was that, like, how long does it take to charge? Yeah. I'd had this in my mind, like you said, 10, 12 hours, so it's like, so what happens? The technician's out driving around and they're at 15% or 20% of battery life. And they're like, God, dude, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. I got 2 more service calls.
Yeah. And you're not going to be sitting for a long time is what you're thinking, right?
Right. And it was like, well, how do we handle this? And so I was looking, so for instance, a 24 E-Transit has this 89 kilowatt battery, right? So it's not super big in the grand scheme. It's kind of right in the middle. But that battery on rapid charge will go from 15% to 84% charge in 34 minutes. And I thought, that's not that bad. You could deal with that. If you thought about it and went, well, from a logistics standpoint, if this was a common thing, I would petition to say, hey, you know what? I'd love to see my supply house have a EV charger in front of it.
Right.
Or a bank of rapid chargers. Now, who pays for that? I don't know. Right. But if it was like a pay-op, like where you just roll up, plug in, you go in, you're getting your parts. I mean, you could be at the counter for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, easy. Easily.
I don't want to name it.
Yeah, I don't want to, but
Nelson. You can be there for a lot more than 20 minutes. No, the charging is, so that's a rabbit hole I went down and kind of got stuck in because there's a lot of, seems like there's a lot of not aftermarket. There's a lot of companies that are supplying chargers and they're not all the same, but then the real reliable info is like you said, you started with the E-Transit. So I'll follow up and say, yes, I think the tech specs on these sites for these vehicles are pretty good. It seems. Yeah. And so the E-Sprinter, which is Mercedes, right? They're giving you basically two, the same battery pack, 2 different motors, a 100-watt motor and a 150 kilowatt motor, but they're giving you specs on 2 different chargers, right? So they got the AC charger, which is that level 1, plug it in at, and they're saying 0 to 100% at 9.6 kilowatts is 12 to 13 hours. Okay, so that's that level 1, the charger that's going to be sitting on the seat in the bag and you get home and you can plug it in kind of deal.
Yeah, plug it into any outlet.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So you probably pull right up to your garage and at least run an extension cord. I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Have something
most
there.
Garages, right? Okay, but then they have the DC power, DC chargers, which is what you're talking about, Andy, like the rapid chargers. That's probably what people are going to most easily recognize what we're talking about. But that's the 115 kilowatt is what the Sprinter is saying. They have 115 kilowatt and 50 kilowatt. So you went from 9.6 to 50 or 115. I mean, that's a huge difference,
huge
right?
Leap, yeah.
And so 3 different chargers. Now we're at DC. Charge time from 10 to 80% battery. So they're not saying 100, but they're saying 10 to 80. With the 50 kilowatt, 93 minutes. Okay, hour and a half. Yeah. It'll get you to 80% from 10 in an hour and a half. Go to the 115. Any guesses on how much time that takes from 10% to 80?
Oh, 40 minutes.
Right, yeah. Okay.
42 minutes. So if you had DC power available to you, one of those rapid chargers, basically the Mercedes hookup.
Yep.
Now you're looking at less than an hour. You could charge this thing and you'd have I wouldn't have any reason to believe you couldn't finish out a day or 2 off that charge, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Well, and even if you figured if being if you're doing it for service calls, and here's the thing to look at too. So you have to look at it from a standpoint of service guys versus install guys. Right. And I could see the electric vehicles for installers being way more beneficial than the guys for service in a standpoint of being rural. Right. Okay. So if you have an electric vehicle and say you only had the level 1 charger that's available to you, and you go to an install, you're not driving around all over the place while you're doing an install. You're going to be there. Usually if it's a full boiler system or a forced air furnace and an air conditioner, you're going to be there all day anyways, and the van's just going to be sitting there. So why not just plug it in real quick
Yep.
to the homeowner's power outlet? You're going to use their power anyways for something maybe like a vacuum pump or a, whatever. I could see the viability of the electric vehicle for install crews. Totally worth it. Yeah, but as far as the service guys, if you look at it from that 40-minute standpoint, you could go to a parking lot real quick that has a rapid charger, sit there for that 40 minutes and do your invoicing, paperwork, whatever you got to do while you're waiting for it to charge, and then buzz on over to the next call if you need to charge. So
I think it's a fundamental shift on like how your people are filling out their time in their day, like, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, you got
Right.
paperwork, you got to fill out stuff, you got to maybe inventory a van, whatever. It's not something that has to be done every day for that length of time, maybe.
Right.
But you have to. I think it just changes the way we do things. I think people are going to be listening to this and say, "Well, we shouldn't have to." What's wrong with what we've got? Look, we're not saying anything's wrong with what we've got, but this is something that's coming. At some point, and until they make a hybrid van, which is what I would love to have.
That's what I would like to have. Yeah,
I would order one immediately. I'm just going to go on the record by saying that I've said it before on this podcast.
Yep.
Like if I could get like 30, 40 EV miles out of a hybrid, I'd be like, that'd probably cover me most days. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
So
it'd be totally worth it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right now we don't have that option, unfortunately.
Right.
There's some other vehicles though on the market, and I was looking at, and Mercedes actually does a really good job. If you go on their site and you kind of click through, there's some links, and you get to this PDF that gives you more info, and it's a eSprinter cell sheet .pdf is what they're calling it.
Right.
And it gave me the info like that I was looking for, like what's the range on all these things, right? And so I'm trying to go to every site, and there's the Ford E-Transit, then there's these Bright Drop, which is the Zevo 400, 600, two different models. That's a GM kind of collaboration project. Rivian has the Delivery, which you see the Amazon vans. You probably see them all over your guys' place too. They don't even sell the Rivians to you and I. That's what kind of sucked. I was interested in those for a minute, but then I can't buy one. So, pound sand.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're buying a fleet of them, you can't.
You want to buy, you want to sign a contract for 1,000 of them. They'll probably talk to you in a
right. Yeah.
I want to buy one, and they don't give two squirts about us. But the range thing, obviously, like the top of mind, people are like, well, what's the range? We all have anxiety about range. And I was really interested a couple years ago. We first saw the E-Transit, right? And I was like, damn, I want that because I have a Transit, and I'm I think the Transit has been a great van for me, put it that way.
Yep.
And at the, all in all, I thought, oh, I'm interested in this. And then you look at the range and you're like 100 miles, basically, was it come down to.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, for the configuration I would want and all this stuff, you're looking like 100, 110 miles. And that's before it gets cold, right? Let's not forget the fact that, yes, there is decreased range in cold weather.
Yeah, with cold weather, yep.
I don't know why there's so much hubbub about it in the news and everything, because as far as I know, in my 45 years on this planet, living in a cold climate, I've never seen a battery perform any better when it gets cold out. But anyway, we don't have to get into that. That's the lowest. My point is the E-Transit lowest range, just straight up. It's the lowest one. Then you jump up into these Bright Drops, which I actually did get to see in person, not drive or see driven, but I was at the Builder Show in Las Vegas, and they had the Bright Drop on display in the GM kind of courtyard or whatever booth. And those things were really cool looking, all aluminum construction, like totally engineered from the ground up to be an E-Trans or an E vehicle, which before we hit record, I was bringing up to you guys, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Like, if you look at the Transit or you look at the Sprinter, they're the same vehicle without an engine in it, right? They just adapted it to be a EV, right?
Yeah.
Does that make you? Do you even think about? Is that something you guys even thought about, or does it even seem to matter?
Not really, because even if you figure, like, the Transits and things like that, everybody's going to design a package as far as their how they outfit them, with whatever brand it be for storage boxes, things like that. and they have specific things set up for specific vehicles. But I think you're seeing already a big shift in people getting away from the old clunky packaging and whatnot, as far as all of the shelving that's in there. Everybody's going to like Milwaukee pack outs. I mean, my Transit is completely decked out with pack out because I can yank it off the wall and bring it into the job if I'm doing an install. So I think that standpoint is, I don't think people are going to look at it's got to be a Transit or it's got to be a Mercedes or whatever. I think people are going to probably be more open to different brands. I would think personally.
What do you think, Andy, about just the engineering? Like, do you think it should, like, do you think there'd be a benefit of at the factory they've designed this thing from the ground up to be an EV, or they've just retrofit, or, you know what I'm saying, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess it doesn't bother me that, one way or another, really. If I'm looking at an EV, it's a totally new thing to me. There's going to be some changes that we'll have to get used to. So if it's a design, like the body style's different, like the Rivian or the Bright Drop, I don't think it really bothers me that much. I mean, the Bright Drop, I look at that and go, that's pretty cool. It's a walkthrough.
I'm not gonna
I mean, you're a walk-in. You can get out
those vans though. Like think about how far of a shift we went just with from the old Econoline, right? So everybody was used to that typical quote unquote creeper van, right? And then
Free
they said, "Hey,
van.
we're getting rid of the E series, and no more Econolines. We're switching over to Transits." And that giant leap from just that van to the Transits. The Transits, in my opinion, look more futuristic style anyways, and even with a combustion engine in them. And then going from that to the EVs is just a natural progression in terms of how they look. And as far as that, like you said, with the engine or without the engine, same model series or body or not, they already are shifting towards that anyways.
Yeah. It seems to me though that people are going to look at the existing, like the Transit, the Sprinter, and say like, this is a proven technology, build quality, body, everything like that. Right, I was attracted to that Bright Drop simply by the fact that this thing is like, it's kind of got that bread truck, modern bread truck kind of build, dimensionally, like it's very square. Walls are upright. It is made to be. It is like a cargo vehicle rethought, right? It has some features in it, or some dimensions and thought. It looks to me that has some thought put into it that are how did they take the Transit or the Sprinter and improve it? Put it that way. That was my initial thought. I don't know anything about the vehicle. Like, is this thing going to have, is it going to lose all brakes and ball joints in the first years? Like, I doubt it. I mean, GM's involved. They kind of know how to make vehicles, right? But real quick, the range, I started out, the Transit was 100 miles. That's the lowest, 110, 120, whatever. You call it what you want to call it. Let's just call it 100. Let's round it off. Yep. And that's not awesome. When you start talking about cargo vehicles and you start this conversation, and if that were all we had to choose from, I think every one of us has the same opinion. Like, that's not going to be enough for probably the majority of our industry. Now, I think people also have a misunderstanding of how much they actually drive in a day. So, there's that. But then you go to the next one, which is the Rivian. We can't get it, but they're saying 161 miles. That's what they say on their ratings. The Bright Drops are a huge jump from those two. I mean, not even comparable. Like, honestly, they're over twice the Transit at 250. They're 100 miles more than the Rivian. Put it that way.
Yeah, there's no way a average person could say that wouldn't work for them for a HVAC business or mechanical business or anything like that. I mean, that's in one day you're not doing 250 miles on a norm in 95% of situations.
I like I said, I'm on the edge of rural, and I do a lot of hour away. Second home, lake homes, things like that. 250, get me a couple days, no problem. Like,
exactly,
honestly,
same thing.
It's not even an issue to me.
Yep.
Then you get to the Sprinter, And not to go too long on this range stuff, but it's a big part of this conversation. You go from 250 with the Bright Drop to 273 with the Sprinters. Seems awesome. To be an amazing amount of range for such a huge vehicle. Also, the Sprinter's 170-inch wheelbase. Everybody knows the Sprinters are huge, right? Like
they're massive. Yeah,
they're massive. Right. This is a 170-inch with the what do they cut? The 6 foot or 79-inch height. So I don't know. It's not that's I think the interior height. Let me look at the spec real quick. Yeah, interior cargo height. So what are these things like? 10 feet tall, I think is what it comes down to, 9 feet or something like that. So it's not a small vehicle by any means.
Yeah, that's huge.
Did you see that? I just had the Bright Drop website pulled up. That 600, the wheelbase on that thing's 183 inches.
That's what they had on display at the builder show, and immediately Heather's like, this thing is like a land yacht, and I'm like, and I want one.
Exactly. It's
amazing.
It pulled up on my computer here. They are nice looking vans. Yeah.
They are. I think the Rivian, the Bright Drop, I mean, without a doubt, because they're new, I think I'm not unlike a lot of people would say they're kind of more attractive, you know?
Yeah.
I initially started looking at that Rivian and got interested in it before I knew about the Bright Drop, and it's simply because of this. It's much the same reason I own a Japanese mini truck with my company wrap on it. Yeah. It looks different, and I'm not going to lie. That is one of the motivations I have is that my business could be driving around town and it would look different. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. Well, and it's a quick way of marketing that you know, either way, everybody's got to do some form of marketing. You know, however they do it, and that's a quick, easy way that you didn't have to spend a reoccurring amount of money on. You know, you got your van, it's yours, you're doing your thing with it, and it catches people's eye because most people aren't going to have it right away.
There's another vehicle that we didn't even talk about yet, and they're the Canoe. And it's a pretty neat vehicle. They have a truck version and a van version in different configurations and size. It's kind of like a, you know, I don't know how to explain it. There's just so many variations to what you can build with their platform. But to me, it doesn't really look like it's quite there for the volume in size like that our businesses are looking for. However, that's not true for everyone. There's plenty of I can think of like HVAC service techs, electrical service, building maintenance service that don't need giant vehicles that are doing you know, the ones that are already just utilizing like the small Transit Connects, that kind of size vehicle.
Yeah. Yep.
The Canoe would fit right in right now. I think they're expanding that though. I don't know much about that company. It's pretty interesting to see them growing on the retail side or like on the consumer side or consumer. What's the term? Just the street vehicle, not commercial vehicles. Put it that way. Yeah. Okay.
The consumer. General public.
It's interesting to me. So back to my electrician buddy, I asked him, you know, he's like, 10, 15, 20 of these last year, hopefully going to do more. And I said, well, what do they cost? And basically it's pretty common. He's like, usually the panel's in the basement. We're putting a charger in the garage. So I've got to run from the panel and, you know, unfinished basement, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, as long as there's room in the panel and they got like a 200 amp service or something like that, we're probably good to go. $1,000. Okay. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's a fair price. It sounds to me, because I know that it's not a simple job in most cases. He's like, if the panel's in the garage and there's room in it, he's like, I can get that price down a couple $100, no problem. Just the material costs alone, it's going to be less.
Yeah.
But of course, everybody's, you know, well, it's got to be on this side of the garage because I park here. And it's like, well, it'd be great if you could just switch. If the two of you could just switch, you know, the partner, you know, the husband, wife, wife, whatever it is like, if you could just switch and I can make it, you know, I can
switch sides of the bed.
Exactly. I could cut a few $100 off this install price, but you know, people get what they want. And then he said, I said, what's the upper? And he's like, I don't think I've ever done one that was more than like $1,500. Okay. Yeah. You know, I don't think people are buying EVs on a bargain yet. I know that they're only because I say that because these car companies aren't offering real low cost EVs yet. It's coming for sure.
Right. Oh yeah. Well, it looks like that Canoe one, I've got it pulled up here. That one's starting at $30,000. I mean, that's not that bad as far as a pickup truck.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't seem to be, it's more of it's not a commercial vehicle though.
No,
I mean,
definitely not. You could maybe argue that one for like a sales guy or something like that, maybe just bopping around town or something. But yeah, definitely the pickup looking at it, it's definitely not set up for service at all.
Real quick before we go, I want to cover a couple things. Like you bring up the pickup salesperson, that kind of thing. Like, look, not every vehicle for a fleet is going to be a big cargo van, right?
Exactly.
You've got office staff you might be supplying vehicles for, and if your company culture and ideals are going this way, and you're looking at these vehicles, and you're going to build your fleet out in them, you're going to be looking at cars, SUVs, pickups, not just cargo vans. We've been focusing on the cargo vans, I think, for obvious reasons. But back to the initial part of the conversation, how you got this all going in the first place, Denver. And thank you, by the way, because it's been very interesting to me to just learn more about it. And it's kind of what that did is your Instagram post got me thinking and really looking into it.
Yeah, for sure.
The employees parking at home, whether or not, I mean, obviously in the scenario that they can do that, right?
Right.
These Ford, Mercedes, they all have on their websites plenty of information. I'm not going to get into any specs or anything like that, but they have these telematic systems where you can put a charger at your employee's house, if that's how it's going to end up. And those things are connected to the internet. They're running through their software to optimize charge times, to lower the cost, to keep the batteries running for as long as possible, which, Andy, I want you to touch on before we quit on those batteries. You had some pretty neat information before we hit record, but that whole thing is really, it seems like they've got that figured out. Whether or not you've got like a depot style charging where you've got everybody comes into the shop and they charge at the shop and you've got 30 chargers, they've got software and design parameters around putting that stuff in. So you're optimizing everything, keeping the cost down, optimizing the charging on the vehicles, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then like the employee at home, what's really important about that and what we talked about, like just in the comment section of your post, Denver, is that, who pays for it, right? Well, those chargers they're keeping track of that so that you can pay for your employees' cost burden, like all through that whole network system. So it seems like that's already figured out. I don't think anybody has to invent that at all. It's already part of a system that you're going to end up paying like a subscription for,
Right.
But Mercedes, I think they offered it 3 years off the bat, or Ford, one of the two, was like, "Well, I'll give you this telematics for 3 years for free." I don't know what they're going to charge,
right?
But.
Well, it's interesting because you could take it at that. If it was like real time data, you could roll up to the customer's house and be like, "Hey, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and plug in while I'm doing this water heater change out," and you're doing your thing, and then when you're done at the end of it, it's like, Here's what I used for electricity. It's whatever. You'd have to figure out, the rating and everything, but you'd be like, okay, I was plugged in for 45 minutes and hey, we're just going to throw you a discount of, $12
Think about
or $18,
mileage
whatever
reimbursement, basically.
I was just looking
at the approach that
same thing. Yeah. Well, and I
same
think
concept.
the big thing too, though, is that the whole stigma on these electric vehicles with that is the same comparative stigma that people had to heat pumps, right? Everybody's switching over to electric heat pumps. I personally did do the switch. I have a Fujitsu heat pump system at my house, and everybody, it's not going to be able to heat. Oh, blah, blah, blah. I'm in, obviously northern Michigan. I'm up at the tip of the mitt. And it gets cold, like really freaking cold here.
Yeah.
And we went from using 3 tanks of propane per winter and switched all the way to only using 1.
For the whole year,
the whole year. Yeah. And so, I think that there's that whole stigma of, heat pumps were crap. They're not going to work in the cold, blah, blah, blah. And I think that now that we figured out, hey, it does work. And now that stigma has now transitioned over to electric vehicles. And they're, it's not going to work. But that's where my standpoint was, whereas, okay, for fleets and small businesses and things like that, it's like, well, how are we going to navigate that? Because I'm not opposed to the electric vehicles at all. It's just, I was just trying to figure out that navigation of that.
I'd love to have somebody have joined us on this episode, and I'd put out the invitation too. Honestly, this is an honest statement. I am putting out an invitation for somebody that is absolutely against these. But But to qualify that, I want you to have at least put some thought and research, some learning into it. I'm not saying I'm not a researcher.
Right.
Look, I am an investigative journalist. Obviously, we know that. No,
Yes, absolutely.
But like if you've got some real ideas on why this isn't going to work for a service company fleet or whatever, or even just like my own one van shop, I'd love to have that conversation and be honest with you.
Right.
Okay. I think for me, the right vehicle is going to work just fine. And I think there's 2 vehicles already on the market that are the right vehicle. I don't know quite the availability of that Bright Drop, but it's just specs alone. And I know they're available. The Sprinter is like, it's a no brainer. Like everything about it says this would work for me perfectly. And in fact, the size of the vehicle, because my buddy Mike Ring, who listens here, and he's a buddy, I work with him all the time. You've seen him in some of my videos. He has a Transit, not an E-Transit, or I mean a Sprinter, not the E version, but that vehicle is phenomenal for dimensions and everything. It was like friggin' awesome. So I already know that would work for me with an electric motor in it. But Andy, let's get to the batteries, because we're all in agreement here. These things would work, but how long are they going to work? So you did a little bit more research, investigative journalism.
Yeah.
Right.
MTGA style.
That's right. Yeah. I dug into, I didn't, I was able to ask Google
AI.
to do it
this
for me.
This podcast is so cutting edge. We're using AI for our research.
Hey, I have AI answering my phone.
It's up
now.
there.
So yeah, I mean, AI, it is what it is, man. It's here to stay.
Yep.
So anyway, I asked, my first question was, how long does a battery last? Like not like range, but like what's the life? And the results came back with the average life of a battery system in an EV is 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, definitely not a lot of time.
Daily driver, right? And I'm like, wow, okay. That's not a long time. And I'm like, all right, well, okay. What do you do there? So then we looked at, I was like, well, at what point is it under warranty? Is a battery like tires where it's like 100% not covered under factory warranty, And it sounded like the battery and the charging system was covered under factory warranty.
Yeah.
Give or take. Don't hold me to this. Most of the vehicles was 8 years, 100,000 miles. That would seem like it was, I don't want to say industry standard, but pretty standard.
Let me add on to that real quick.
Places.
With a service contract, and I don't know what that entails, through Mercedes, they say that it's extendable to 185,000 miles, which is
holy moly.
Okay. I don't know what that service contract costs. Wow. Seriously, there's no way it's cheap. There's no way it's cheap because
there's like that service contract 8 years on the truck for the oil changes.
No.
Right. Their warranty is 8 years.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that brought up the next question. Well, how much does it cost? Is this like, you run down to the depot or Lowe's and, pick up a flat of batteries and swap them out?
I was way off on the guess. You had us guessing and I was not even close. So I'll start out by saying I said 10 grand and you're like, whatever. The look on your face said I was wrong.
Yep. Nope. Basically the price range for a Ford EV. So this isn't just Transit. This is Ford EV. So it could be like Mach 3. It could be who knows what else. The average price to replace
my guess was 35 grand.
Right. And Lane,
mine was 35 grand, just to preface this.
Yep. Lane, if you're listening, add a little bit of music right here. I want a drum roll or something. Andy, tell us what it is.
So the average price for Ford EV is $28,000 to $35,000. Right. And so I was like, holy cow, this is insane. So I had to do a little bit more digging on it, right? And come to find out, all of these batteries are modular, right? So if you had one module that failed, I think they said the average price seemed pretty standard, is about $3,500. So, if you get one module that goes bad, you could replace that module and maybe everything's fine for the next couple of years until the next module fails. But it just was another little added thing, like where I was like, I guess I hadn't really thought about that. If I went, God forbid, I don't even want to think about it, took one of my Transits down to the Ford dealership and said, hey, the motor's bad in this. The motor and the transmission's toast in this.
Exactly.
What's it cost to replace? I was probably rolling up on the 20 grand mark. I got to believe by the time it's
only
done
going
at
to
the,
sit
at
there
the Ford
for
dealership,
6 months
right?
too.
You know, so we're
Well,
not
that's the thing
too
too. Yeah, to
far.
think of, you know,
Well,
with
let's not talk that.
you know, when you have the say your tranny blows, right? You're out a vehicle for quite a long period of time. You know, even if it took a week, you know, I mean, that's a substantial amount of time. Whereas with those battery modules, it looks to me pretty simple in terms of kind of like dropping you drop a gas tank, right? And you fall right out of the bottom. Same concept, drops right down, unplug it, plug it back in, put it back up, screw it in. You're probably down one day. That's
Look, you guys, my EV, I'm just going to have them power with AA's, so I can just switch out AA's.
It's like that one commercial where they keep filling them.
Just Costco.
What are you doing this weekend?
Batteries.
Yeah, you going to the cabin this? Nope, I'm changing my AA's for the entire weekend.
For the entire weekend.
Yeah, I'm gonna unwrap 63
that's what
packages of 24 batteries.
Oh God. Oh yeah.
Okay, real quick.
I think though people really need to open their eyes to it and just be. It's not like it's being forced fed down their throats like everyone thinks it is, and I don't look at it that way. I just think it's a standpoint of we have to move forward and progress with things in certain ways, and I don't see this as being that bad of a thing.
I'm interested. My power at my house is coming from a nuke plant that's like 30 miles away. I'm not looking at this as an environmental. I'm not making a stand.
I'm not
environment.
either.
I'm not.
Nope,
you know,
I'm not
this is
either.
not the sword I'm going to fall on. I'll be 100% upfront, and I've said it 1,000 times in conversations with friends, Andy, everybody. I don't want to go to gas stations. I park my vehicle in the same spot every single day. Like, these are my thought processes. I'm being totally honest with you. That's it. I think it's intriguing. I don't see the cost as being a burden, except for when you start talking about longevity and lifespan of batteries.
Right.
That is something to think about. Absolutely. I'm also not trying to save money on gas or save the earth. That's just the way it is. I don't want to get into that. That's not where we took this conversation from the start, but that is what people are thinking when you have these conversations. It's honestly,
that's the thing.
It's one of the first things they bring up. I'm not trying to save the planet here. I'm not.
No.
So that's me. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Exactly.
Before we close out of this, I had the last piece of information that I was like, well, okay, so we went through all these steps of like, you know, what this, you know, how long does this thing last and all, and the cost points.
Okay.
So the cost to charge, right? Average cost to charge. So I thought this was actually pretty interesting. So this is on a large vehicle battery, right? So I would assume that probably going to cover like the Transit, maybe not the Sprinter because the Sprinter's got a bigger battery. For instance, we'll go to Eric's home there. Runs out at about $15 to charge.
That's crazy.
I'm like, yep, that's not bad.
And you know, you started you're at a deficit from the very beginning if you're installing the level 2 charger, all that kind of stuff. Look, you're not doing this. You're not saving money immediately, but over time, absolutely, it starts paying for itself.
It will. It's just like my house with the heat pumps.
Right.
Yeah. You know, switching my house over to heat pumps, I went from spending $700 per tank to fill it up 3 times a year to now filling it only once. I'm immediately first season, I'm already saving, you know, and granted, you know, it's different because I was able to buy the equipment purchase price, you know, it's different for a consumer. So that has to go into play, but it does pay for itself. It will.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you aren't spending on propane in your case, you're spending on $150 to $200 electric bill, and the coldest time, you know,
my coldest, my most expensive bill during the coldest of winter, the highest I got was $183. It averaged typically around $120 to $150.
Well, I mean that's kind of following in suit with what my next little stat was. And that was that the average cost to charge an electric vehicle at home, so probably on trickle charge, you know, 110 volt charge, was $56 a month. And I was like, huh.
Yeah.
And it's basically 5 cents per mile, which is less than the 13 cents per mile average cost of a fuel powered or gas powered vehicle.
Well, I just filled my van up from empty the other day at current gas prices in the Twin City metro area, and it was $93.
Yep. Yeah. I just filled up my truck yesterday. It was $75. I filled up one of the install vans. It was $110. Yeah, I mean,
and
that's
I'm
a lot of money for a week.
On that $90 is going to get me not a week. Put it that way.
Yeah, same. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have to fill up at least twice a week usually.
No.
Yeah.
4 days.
So there's some talking points here. We spent a lot of time talking about it. Of course, kind of a little bit all over the place as we are on this podcast a lot. So if you get frustrated with that, I'm sorry. We're just real people talking in a conversation. We did a little bit of looking into this ahead of time. There's a way more that we could cover on this. So I said a little bit ago, as we wrap up, I want to invite anybody to reach out to us on this topic. I think this is very interesting.
Pat Finley would probably be a good one to talk to, because Pat with Commercial Kitchen Chronicles, with Pat, he had mentioned that one of his employees does have an electric vehicle that they do take home. So it might be interesting to talk. Might be interested to talk to Pat on it and get him on and do a roundtable on it.
That's a great idea, because we didn't even bring up yet, and I'm not prepared to, because I don't know all the ins and outs, but there are federal tax credits and blah, blah, blah that, that can go along with this, state, local, all kinds of stuff. Rebates from your local utilities. I know my local utility give you $1,000 if you put an EV charger in.
There's your EV charger paid for.
It pays my electrician buddy the cost of the install.
Exactly.
Yep. So I think this is a topic we should revisit. I'm inviting anybody to reach out to us. You can email us. Andy, can you give us the email?
It's maketradesgreatagain@gmail.com.
It's the longest email ever. Yeah.
And you can also DM us over on Instagram. And it's easy to do that because on your major podcast apps, there's just a link right in the show notes. You can click and it'll bring you right to our Instagram DMs. And either way, please reach out. I'd love to have more conversations on this. I'm not looking to argue with anybody. That's not the invite. The invite is to have a conversation and learn from each other, and we can learn together, whatever it is. And pro or con, I'm not against talking to somebody that's not for this technology at all.
Yeah.
In fact, that's how we're all going to learn from each other, is if we hear from everybody. Denver, I want to thank you for coming on. I'm going to cut us off,
thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
We're over 45 minutes. This is a long one, but it was a big one.
Long one.
I'm happy that we talked about it. I appreciate it.
It's a big topic.
Yeah.
All right, dude. Andy, you got anything else? I feel like I say it.
I don't have anything else to add to it. Thanks.
No.
Just effective and efficient.
I wouldn't say that.
Efficient.
Good looking is what I would say.
That's right.
There's Denver's phone.
No, that might even be
There's the cue.
See you guys.